How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to the channels. We are doing another little Roster Mania reaction video. I hope that you guys had a wonderful Christmas, a wonderful holiday with the family or whoever that you wanted to celebrate it with. I know that I did, so we took a little bit of a break off, but now we're refocused. We're ready to go for what should be an interesting conversation to continue with. We did learn a little bit of news since the last video that we had, so I'm eager to talk about this with you guys, get some discussion out there, and really see what could be next for OpTic Texas, because that information that we learned is that it sounds like Arcitys and Pred are officially both off the table. So the two early targets that it sounded like OpTic Texas were most interested in, it now sounds like that they have struck out. And maybe, and according to this tweet coming in from Intel CDL, it sounds like to him that these deals were actually never really close to happening. That's what he goes on to say in this tweet. I'm sure you guys have seen it. I mean, literally the tweet has 1 million views, for God's sake. But he basically, goes on to say that to my understanding, both Arcitys and Pred are staying with their respective teams, and a deal for either of these two was not close to being done. And so, the historical mantra with OpTic Texas, right, has been T2P. And right now it feels like that very well could be it again. But maybe time to panic, right? Maybe time to panic right now for OpTic. Is it? It's very possible, because again, you did have technically two players on the table. Now, again, who knows what's going on with Illey, but I would imagine, all speculation, that Dashy would be open for business. OpTic would be in the Dashy business to go and let him go to another team if it allowed for a piece to come, back to them. Maybe not, but again, that is what you have to imagine was most likely the case. But it does go to show, and again, another thing that adds to the panic aspect of it all, it goes to show that franchises are absolutely going to hold on to players if they don't feel like they're getting even close to an even, if not a better deal for them. And not only that, for OpTic now, right, because you did strike out with those two, but now it feels like more than ever, the fact that you have expressed interest, or at least it's rumored that you've expressed interest. I mean, Dashy has gone on the Twitter, profile name changes, the bio changes with Illey and Dashy going on stream, all of these things. It is impossible, it feels like, for them to even consider saying, you know what, guys, let's try this again, right? We've already seen it, right? The tweets went out from the OpTic Texas Twitter that said, thank you, Dashy, thank you, Illey, we're moving on. And then they decided to bring it all back, and it did work, right? Scump announcing his retirement, all of these things just for them to last one event, finish top 12, and now we're back to where we started again. So it would be, to me, shocking without a doubt if they decided to run it back. I also don't even want to act as if that's a possibility, because I don't think that it is. I really don't. I do not think that there is a world in which we go into Major 2 qualifiers, which I think starts on like January 13th, whatever the date is. I would be shocked if we see the same four-man lineup suit up for OpTic Texas in the starting lineup. I really would. I would. Now, I will say we're going to get into all the options for OpTic. The one that I will say is possible is that, do I think that all four of them could technically be on the team but not in the starting lineup? I do. I do think that there is a chance in which maybe a player like Dashy goes to the bench, maybe they bring somebody else in, and then maybe later down the line he could get brought forth. Other than that, I don't see a world in which this same four-man lineup is instantly back together. So that then leaves the hottest question going on right now in the CDL, the hottest question going on right now in the league is, who does OpTic Texas focus on, right? If the two targets that they were interested in Arcitys and Pred are no longer there, who do you go for? Who is going to be the third or the fourth, depending on if Illey and Dash are going to be here? I think without a doubt, the difficulties so far of Roster Mania indicate to me that if I'm OpTic Texas, I'm definitely trying to keep Illey. I mean, I think Illey's a great player. I think really the only question marks are really just injury-wise. So I don't think it's by any means the same deal in terms of what could be going on with Dashy, what's going on with Illey. But where do you go for now? What players do you attempt to try to grab? Which is what we're going to talk about. So we're going to go ahead and revisit, in case you missed our last video, this little dashboard that we have made here with all players that are currently in the CDL on the bench, on academy teams, in the starting lineups. We've highlighted players in red who have kind of been in these conversations Previously, Pred was in the red, no longer is, because, again, it sounds like that is not going to happen. So let's talk about this, right? I want to end up this video talking about actual options for OpTic Texas. Is it really time to panic, or are there still good pieces available? So I'll be the first one to tell you, I really don't know 100%, right, values across the league, how other teams see different roster changes, and even the options that certain teams have. Like, it feels like we're just kind of throwing players at a board and hoping that it sticks. So I've really done my best to actually highlight players that I think are potentially attainable for OpTic Texas. So I have these kind of labeled in a few different ways. The first list that we're going to start off with is headliners, right? Okay, we get, right, Pred, Arcitys would be the ultimate headliners. However, these ones are pretty interesting too. The first one that I will say, to me, I actually think is a possibility, is CAMMY from the Minnesota Rocker. Now, this to me would absolutely have to involve a trade of some point. Like, there is no way in the world that Minnesota allows for CAMMY to go over to OpTic Texas. Like, that stuff does not happen. But do I think that CAMMY is easier to get than a Pred on a Seattle Surge, possibly an Arcitys on LAG? Yes, I absolutely do. I also think that there is potential for a trade of some sort to come into play, given the fact that Minnesota did take a very big risk in going for the team that they did. They had another slow land performance. Last year, we saw the same thing happen, where on occasion they would have a great qualifier. Then they'd go to land and finish last. They go into Major 1, number 1 seed, bomb out early. So that is something interesting for me with Minnesota, is the potential for either an Illey or a Dashy to get added to the rocker. Now, I think the Dashy would be the far more interesting piece of the two. But, I mean, if you are OpTic, right, and you are in a dire situation right now where it's like, listen, we have got to make a move of some sort, I do think that CAMMY actually could be a very good addition to this team. Now, technically, you'd have 2 flexes, you know, if you decided to throw in Illey instead, or however it would work out. Again, all those things are hard to come by. And then maybe if you did add CAMMY, you'd want to bring in an SMG, because CAMMY could go to main, Scum could go to flex. A lot of different options. However, just in general, getting CAMMY to OpTic, I do think is a possibility. Now, how likely is it? That all depends on Rocker. It has only been one event. Do I think that this team wants to run it back? Absolutely. But you do question for Rocker, hey, you know what? The big mantra around us right now is Afro didn't have enough slang. It was all about Afro. Nobody was there with them. Imagine a combo in which you have Dashy and Afro together. On paper, it would be fantastic. Alongside of Attach, who could switch back to the flex role. Maybe he's allowed to be a little bit more mobile. I think that would be great for them. You have somebody in Bance who I think actually would really work well with somebody like Dashy, a great in-game communicator. I think you do have a lot of motivated people. Rocker is a franchise that historically has not really received any negative criticism by any player ever. Like, every guy who has played on Rocker has nothing but positives to say about him. If there was a franchise that could potentially house a personality or maybe a work ethic like Dashy, I think it could be Minnesota. So that to me is a move that I feel like would actually work out for both sides. OpTic Texas get what they want. Minnesota Rocker, do they let go of a very valuable piece, someone who I think is great for them and has an excellent future with them? Yes, but you bring in an unbelievable slaying talent that very well could fit your team almost perfectly. Again, from an on-paper POV, we don't know. But that is one, and probably the most interesting move that I think is actually a possibility. Like I said, who knows percentages, likelihoods, all of that stuff. The next player that I do want to talk about, because I feel like no one's really talked about the CAMMY one. This has been one that's talked about a little bit. Clay, right? What a story it would be. What a story it would be if Clay ended up going over to OpTic Texas. He has, I mean, experience with pretty much every player, I think even in the franchise. Like, if we're talking even going to the coaches, like JP has experience with him. We know that Ray does, and the coaching staff. He's obviously won a world championship with Shotzi. I mean, if Clay comes in directly for Dashy in this situation, he's played with Scump. He's won a world championship with these two. You have a Dallas Empire reunion when it comes down to it. And I don't know. I think from a in-game POV, I feel like you are happy with this if you're OpTic. I don't think that OpTic Texas is necessarily looking for just an absolute slayer to come in and dominate. I don't think that's what they're looking for. I think that OpTic, more than anything, if they could value one specific item in terms of like characteristics, I think that they are looking for more of a cohesive unit. I think they're looking for an actual strategic team, like a development, something that really is key in MW2. It's not all about the slang. It is so much about teamwork, call-outs, being aware of each other's positions. I mean, obviously, we've seen what Clay has done with the Legion franchise, giving them their best placement that they've had since 2019, 2020, back in the first year of the CDL. So Clay coming to OpTic Texas, do I think it's a possibility? I think that it is. Again, I mean, does like Dashy go over to Legion in this case? Would Illey go over to Legion in this situation? Would Legion even let Clay go? I imagine they're going to be holding on to him for dear life, but Legion franchise, you know, maybe you get paid off a bit. Maybe you get Dashy in return. Who really knows? I think that Clay is a possibility. I think it actually would be a good move for OpTic to make. Again, it just doesn't feel 100% likely that could be the case. Another one that we'll talk about, which would definitely be a headline move, would be Big Wake, right? Big Wake for Boston. Breacher off of a poor placement. You know, again, they started off the league looking so strong. Awakening has the unfortunate sickness at Major 1 where actually Beans, his replacement, has to jump in and play. I think like the final series or final 2 series. I forget what it was. A lot of games going on. But Big Wake to OpTic Texas, I mean, he would, by definition, kind of fill a role that you need. I mean, he is definitely a Slayer, a great search destroy player, kind of fills a gap. When we talk about OpTic Texas's roster composition, maybe he could go over to an AR. Maybe we could see an adjustment when it comes to Illey's play. Maybe you get rid of both. You bring in Awakening as a main. Scump goes to a flex. Again, lots and lots of options out there. But I will be honest with you. I did want to mention this. I don't think that it's at all likely. I think if you're Boston, you're like, you know what, guys? Do we have a very slow, Major 1? 100%. But I don't think that Breach are interested to get involved in all of this chaos. A lot of us, and myself included, loved this roster change during the offseason. Did Boston underperform 100%? I think that they're interested to run it back. However, you know, if Illey's available, if Dashy's on the table, it could be something that Boston considers. And this is really what all of the players that I'm talking about are actual changes that I think if you are the franchise, OpTic Texas comes calling, you take the call and you think about it. Like, I'm not throwing these out there to be like, yep, okay, all right, OpTic, yeah, we'll talk about this, all right. No, I actually think that these franchises will discuss moves like this. Another one would be HUKE, maybe from the LA Gorillas. I mean, it feels like right now for LAG, they are very hungry and eager to bring in some players from their academy roster. Early on, when it sounded like Arcitys could be out of the picture, it sounded like, you know, you had Assault, Joe Deceives, Diamond Con coming into this team to play alongside of HUKE. So I think if there is an order of, you know, preferable players for LAG, I think Arcitys is number 1. I think HUKE's number 2. So it would not be easy for LAG to let go of HUKE, but you do run into this situation where, you know, previously HUKE has been attached to OpTic Texas. I mean, back in the day, they wanted to play with them. HUKE has previously played with Shotzi before. He's previously played with Illey before. He's previously been coached by Rambo, Ray. I mean, for God's sake, it's basically OpTic and Envy combined. HUKE was Envy's main guy in multiple games for years. So there would be, you know, a semblance of, hey, this actually could work. There's some history here. Would OpTic Texas have to let go of a piece to get him? Probably. If not, I have no idea how that outlook would be, but it would definitely be a headline move. HUKE joins OpTic Texas. Scump would then go to a flex, and then you're thinking about main AR positions. Is it Dashy? Is it Illey? Is it a totally new piece? Who exactly knows? And maybe, I don't know, like, it could involve a 2-player trade. It could involve something big where, you know, maybe Dashy goes to LAG and OpTic expects more than HUKE in return. You know, it's very difficult to pinpoint how these would be. That's why we're talking more broad about them. So we talked about CAMMY, we talked about Clay, we talked about Awakening, we talked about HUKE as our headliners. Next, we'll buzz through these fast. Sneaky but great options. First one is Beans. Beans, to me, would absolutely be a very intriguing option for OpTic Texas. Now, the biggest thing is that he's contracted under Boston Breach. I mean, there's a reason why Boston decided to sign this guy, right? Without question, one of the most interesting players in Challengers right now. He's definitely like top 2, top 3 when it comes down to who is the best player in Challengers, who's the next up. So I think if you're Breach, you do not want to let him go for free. Like, you are absolutely going to hold on to Beans unless something overwhelming ends up coming your way. Now, does OpTic Texas going to find an interest in Beans? I think it's possible. I mean, I think that they definitely have him on the board. That would be my guess. Maybe not. But I think, in terms of like what he was able to do with Toronto EU Academy at the Pro-Am last season versus OpTic Texas, he ended up putting up some pretty decent numbers. Like his team got beat, but there was a lot of people talking highly about him from that moment on. Krem even made a video talking about him and another player in Wardy, how, those two should absolutely be picked up, maybe even to starting rosters. So I think that Beans would actually fit very well. He would be a great flex for this team, could come in. Who knows how the AR situation, the other one, would go. But Beans would be a great pickup, and maybe he'd be easier to acquire than a starter. But at the same time, if you're Boston, you've already seen a lot of worth out of him already. If OpTic is coming and calling for him, I think if you're Breach, you also want to have a safety valve. He is definitely that for you, etc. Now, we just talked about Wardy, so we'll go ahead and give him a combo as well. Another very talented challenger player that I'm so excited ended up getting on a at least bench spot for a team, the New York Subliners. He was actually on stage whenever they won the championship, which is pretty cool. Now, this would also involve a situation where I'm assuming Scump would definitely jump to a flex if Wardy ended up joining, so there is that element to it. He is young, he's never technically played, same thing with Beans as well, but he's never, technically played on a full-on pro team yet. So there is definitely some risks for sure if you're OpTic Texas. I think the Beans is the more known quantity than Wardy is, but I do think that Wardy holds just as much potential, if I'm being honest with you. Obviously played different positions by definition, but the one thing too that also did intrigue me quite a bit was that when Pred was rumored to be going to OpTic Texas, one of the instant additions, one of the instant names that we all heard was Seattle saying, or rather not Seattle saying, but we heard that Wardy could actually be the substitute for Pred. Like if Seattle is looking at, okay, cool, if Pred is off the table, what do we do now? One of their first choices allegedly was Wardy, which is very high praise, right? He's on a different team for the New York Subliners. So if Seattle is already expressing that high level of interest and like, hey, if one of our best players is off the team, we're willing to bring in Wardy to fill Pred's shoes. OpTic Texas maybe could be doing the same thing, right? If we're going to lose Dashy, maybe we bring in a player like Wardy to almost do something similar in that case. So New York Subliners, you're off of a W. I think that you're aware of the bench. I mean, I saw Wardy walking around with the team quite a bit. So he's definitely valued. There's no question about it by the New York Subliners. But if you are NYSL, I don't know 100% if you are like, I don't know if we should let go of this guy because you are off of a W. And obviously if you're off of a W, you're not really concerned about, hey, roster changes, all that stuff. Another name that I think is actually a great fit that I've actually seen a few people toss around, and I couldn't agree more, is Asim from the London Royal Ravens. Stylistically, would fit great when it comes down to he and Shotzi together. I think that Asim is literally like one of the best SMGs that you could play with if you're a superstar. Like, he's willing to jump in. He's willing to be the aggressor. Just somebody who's willing to sacrifice his life, get the W, and he's like, honestly, like, I don't even know how to like describe it in terms of like sports terms, but he is really like an assist man. Like he wants to try and highlight the other teammates. To me, it feels almost like a Kismet type deal where that's kind of his goal on the map is to basically do exactly what Kismet is. Obviously plays with a bit of a higher pace from time to time, or I think more of a consistency standpoint, but I think he would actually work very well with Shotzi. This would be another situation where Scump would have to move to the flex. What do you do with the ARs? That is the question of this video. But I do think that London Royal Ravens, do you want to hold on to Asim? I think that he is probably your number one player to hold on to. I feel like he still is looking phenomenal for them. We saw him do amazing work with the M4 when that was the meta. So I think if you're London, Asim should probably be your piece to hold on to, maybe alongside of Zero from that aspect. But I think there's potential for it. I mean, I don't know exactly. I know London's under new management, so maybe there's an element to that that could be involved. I think, again, from a role standpoint, Asim would actually work very well with this team, and I think he'd be a great fit. I really do. I think he'd be a great fit for OpTic Texas. He is under contract, so there would be a lot to jump through, but I think it would absolutely be easier to get a player like Asim than it would be a Pred or an Arcitys. So there is, an aspect of it of like, hey, Is the seam easier to get? Yes, but how much easier is it really? So there is that to it. So we've talked about sneaky great options. I also kind of throw in a few just very last second names. We could be talking about a player like Exceed, somebody who we know at least hasn't been discussed lately with the Gorillas. I see a lot of talent for that guy. HUKE, maybe even from the Toronto Ultra bench, which for some reason I actually don't even have him listed here. That is my bad for that one. So HUKE maybe could be a choice for OpTic Texas. Known quantity, has been kind of waiting for his chance when it comes down to the Toronto Ultra starting lineup, but obviously they are under great hands right now. And then we'll call this last but not least, challenger players. Like challenger guys, we know some of them that are out there. OpTic Texas is typically a team that isn't going to dip into unknown quantities, unknown names. It just feels like that's not really their cup of tea. Maybe they could look at somebody like Paul X from the London Royal Ravens, maybe a Diamond Con, because he also doesn't feel like he's being attached to the LAG starting lineup. Maybe an Assault if he doesn't get added to the LAG starting lineup. Maybe a Spart if he is off of the LAG starting lineup. So there's a big focus on LAG, considering that they obviously looked amazing when it came down to Major 1, playing on different like spawns, even when it came down to regular pro play versus challengers. I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on that academy team across the league, but you are obviously focusing on that if you are OpTic Texas. So I think that there are still options, and I will say that this season is still very early on. The biggest problem with OpTic Texas is that you had the early season where you could have made a move, you brought the whole team back, and already after the first major, it sounds like the team's in disarray again. And that is really where the problems are coming with them. Like it would be different if we didn't have the tweets of them being dropped of Illey and Dashy, and we were talking about this for the first time. It would be a totally different situation. The fact that this could be happening for a second time, this is where the panic really does start to set in. So I do think that there are options. It really is dependent on, really how much is OpTic willing to invest? How much are they willing to put into this? Also, are teams willing to budge for any and all players? What's the value for a player like Dashy? What's the value for a player like Illey? It's an awkward position, and I think that the teams whoever OpTic could be calling, they absolutely have the more favorable spot. Like, that OpTic Texas is willing to make a move. They're in a bind if they decide to go with their old team. So all of these franchises are going to have the cards without a doubt. But again, I talked about some of my moves. I think that a lot of these actually do have some weight to them, some potential to them. I talked a lot about the CAMMY move, which I think is great. I think that Clay is an option. And then I think the sneaky great options, there are some great pieces in there, right? The Beans and Wardy acquisition. We talked about a seam. The player list kind of goes on. Clay even. So there's some good pieces involved. It's just dependent on what can OpTic Texas do. But they're on the clock. We talked about this last video. They are on the clock right now when it comes down to making a move. And that is where we will call this video curtains. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. If you have not done so already, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're going to continue to provide coverage, continue to provide updates when it comes down to each and every single bit of Rostermania intel info that's going on out there. Going to be providing those opinions as well, but your guys' support has been unbelievable. Greatly appreciated, and I'll see you guys back here on the channel very soon.